part 4. Oh, next. I just use those little vote green buttons as a spacer. There you go. So we're going to talk about public funding of all educations, and the immediate reaction you would probably have about from most Americans was, well, you can't do that. And nobody in our country has ever tried to do something like that. And the ironic part of it is that our elections and our politics has always been set up to do that. Now we basically have a county-based election system, and our country is divided up into over 3,000 counties. And so what we think of it as political expenses are mostly money that the parties are raising to support all kinds of ads and consultants and lawyers to sue everybody, and almost none, and of course corruption and bribery and things like that are probably going on with much of that. Hundreds of billions of dollars that they raise to do various things. Most of that money is just basically flushed down a toilet. So the real expenses, and we'll talk some more about this, is actually at the election committees on the county level. It's where the work actually gets done of setting up polling stations and keeping the calendar up to date and scheduling people to work in those polling places. We'll talk some more. So our federal and state constitutions should be subject to review and approval by people on a periodic basis. And again, one of the arguments you hear from people is, oh, no, you can't change a word of the United States Constitution. Well, Thomas Jefferson was actually on a diplomatic mission to France where they were working on the Constitution. So he never really had any chance to have much input into it or sign it or anything. But when he got back, he did read it, of course, and maybe read it over there. But one of the comments he made was that it should be made to expire every 19 years or so, or 20 years, to allow for generational changes. It was something that was never done properly. So over a period of 20 years, we should go through all of the federal and state constitutions and put them up for comments and reviews and possible revisions, so that everybody has a chance to have input in this country. So limit the size of political contributions. Well, we already said that most of the money that's being raised for politics is simply being flushed down a toilet. So what you really need is some political donations that help support the candidates in their personal expenditures, because we don't want to turn into a country that can only run male, old lawyers, white lawyers. You know, we want a country that can support all kinds of intelligent people to help run our country. So we need to accomplish that by limiting the funds, but also providing some ways for people who want to enter politics to do so. So we talked about the political funding of all elections, and that work is performed by county-based, nonpartisan election commissions, and the laws are standardized for all federal, state, and local jurisdictions. Well, that'll raise some hackles, because, boy, we wouldn't want standardization of anybody's laws in this country. We don't want to guess what we're doing every time we cross a state border here. We've got 50 experiments going on, and many of them aren't going too well. And so there are 324 county and county equivalents. And I say that because Louisiana calls their counties parishes, and Alaska has another name for counties other than that. So, but for the most part, they all serve the basic same function, is that they are one of the lower levels of local government control. Next. Political ethics, part 4, is the campaign spending is strictly defined and fully reported. And to extent, some do that, and some do it well, but many don't. And so we suggest that money that's not spent is returned to the public election pool after the election, so that nobody gets to keep a slush fund of money. When you look these things up, you can see that the people that are already in office may be sitting on $1 million in their campaign fund even before the election cycle begins. And so we elect almost all of our elected officials. I think it's over 90% of the time, and so it's hard to freshen up the government when you can't replace all those people. Specifically, Outlaw Citizens United, and I know a number of attempts have been made at this, but it's just something that we need to do. No more corporation or PAC money, no more dark money to bribe politicians. It's got to go out of our system completely. And we already sent that the vast majority of those dollars are just basically being flushed down the toilet. Lobbyists and consultants are required to provide testimony during open hearings, so that you're not allowed to meet with them behind a closed office and smoke cigars with them. Our election cycles should be less expensive. We are kind of wasteful, I think, in the way we organize things, and that could be tightened up a little bit. But it actually works pretty well. I'm surprised at how well it does work. Specifically defines the nonprofit and not-for-profit organizations, and this especially applies to if you're an organization that is political rather than charitable, you should get to pay taxes. And this includes all the churches that want a political role in this country, make them taxpayers. Strict enforcement of the laws, organizations, and corporations that break our laws, they should lose their licenses to do business in this country. We're very lax about that. Leaders of those corporations and organizations may be subject to fines and incarceration. So it's different than hauling a few of them in and then scolding them publicly in some congressional hearing, kind of slapping their wrist a little bit. Next. Political ethics, no foreign gifts or donations. And the surprising thing to me is, as far as I know, they're already illegal. We just don't seem to enforce it. So I don't know what we can do to emphasize that more, but there shouldn't be any money coming from Israel or Russia or China or India or anybody in any form. No nepotism. Boy, that was a kind of a surprise when Trump basically hired his whole family. But unfortunately, we'll talk about that in more detail. Cronyism, which is basically hiring friends and acquaintances, kind of the same way as nepotism, or conflicts of interest, where you have a revolving door between business and government. So let's say that you have a department that oversees the manufacture of airplanes, and so it would be natural to hire somebody from, say, Boeing to sit in that department. And then when he gets retired, he goes back to Boeing. So of course he's not going to be an unbiased departmental manager. At least the appearances are terrible. So voting should be scheduled on public holidays so that working class people can get to the polls. You need probably a spring and a fall one. Voting by mail is enhanced, and early voting is enhanced. So there's no reason why we have to feel rushed on the voting day when we could have had weeks, perhaps, to be submitting votes. And so we can finish everything up as close to the end of voting day as possible. And so you can define the deadline is carefully defined, but bigger elections will take more time to process. So no government restrictions or requirements that try to suppress voter access and turnouts are allowed. And I don't know how many different ways we can say that, but our country still is working diligently to try to keep people from voting in a wide variety of ways. Actually, it's not spelled out in every constitution, though, that voting is actually a right. That's been defined, like your right to carry guns. We should have the right to cast ballots as well. Voting rights are restored to all felons after they serve their sentence. Electronic voting is researched and evaluated. So if you can do your banking with your cell phone, you should be able to cast your vote the same way. Voting machines and manual methods must be secured and must be completely audit friendly. So you should always be able to have an audit trail with any method that's used next. And automatic recounts are compared to exit polling. This should be a standardized feature. This is a feature that we use when our people go over and review and inspect other countries doing their elections. We would do exit polling to find out if there's a mathematical match between what people say they did, what the votes are being tabulated as. Automatic voter registration at age 18 ought to be a thing, is very much in our country. Same day voter registration. I mean, once you moved, you ought to be able to change your location immediately. You shouldn't have to put up with anything like that. You didn't leave the country or anything. You just moved to the other side of town. Records are updated when people move and or change their name or die. I mean, we're not very good at keeping those records accurately in many places, and that may be a result of the lack of resources, or it may be somewhat intentional with some people. So in the suppression of minor parties, and all political parties are considered to be not-for-profit clubs. So there is no mention of political party in the Constitution. We don't have any official role defined, and we're basically just clubs that help promote candidates to run for elections. And that should be respected as a worthwhile thing to do. And so we think that we shouldn't be placing so many restrictions on the number of dues-paying members to create new political parties, and the requirements to gather signatures to gain ballot access is pretty artificial and problematic. The parties that serve the people they will survive if you serve the people. Political parties must be required to keep detailed meeting records and file financial reports. So I think we mostly do that. All political parties are required to use open democratic voting to select their nominees. So the candidates in the primary elections have to run for public offices as well as the general. So no secret closed meetings. Get rid of the cigars in the back door there. Caucuses or super delegates allowed. So it's got to be something that's a lot more direct and honest than what we've been seeing in the past few decades. Ranked choice voting should be utilized in primary elections for sure, where you've got a lot of variety in the candidates. And we're really talking about open primaries with ranked choice voting as providing a better product, we think. We're supplying top-notch candidates. Candidates' debates are highly controversial lately, but they've been ruined. Excuse me. Basically ruined. They had the group that was nonpartisan running all of that, and the two political parties, major parties, kicked them out and took it over. And since then, they've been really a joke. And they certainly haven't been inclusive of all the parties, and were run by neutral organizations that ask fair questions. It's not a useful tool anymore the way it's being done. Next. Political advertising is replaced by detailed responses to issues by all candidates. So video recordings of campaign speeches are made available to all the public libraries or online. So you can find out information about anybody that's running and actually have a chance to listen to them talk. Bribes are a felony. Both parties may be fined and incarcerated. Now, I don't know when bribes became legal. As far as I can tell, they're still illegal, but we've managed in government to kind of rationalize our way out of it somehow. Insider trading is a felony, for people like Martha Stewart, or many other people who get caught doing it incorrectly. They get inside information about a company and know when to buy or sell their stock. Well, if you're a congressman and you're sitting on a committee that is basically awarding contracts to companies and deciding who wins and who loses, you have an ideal opportunity to make a lot of money. And we suspect that this is one of the main ways they make themselves into millionaires on the salaries that they're collecting officially. Conflicts of interests are defined as illegal. Are defined as illegal. Politicians, excuse me, politicians are not allowed to work for organizations that they regulated for a defined period of time after they leave office. And this is a standard feature in public and private companies, where you sign an agreement or contract basically saying, I'm doing a certain job and I don't hop over to the competitor there and do the very same job after maybe a 2-year break or something. Political office holders are required to have the same benefits as average citizens, and this is not happening now. So if you want better benefits, give them to everybody. And don't allow yourself to have that special treatment that you get if you're high in the mighty office holder. Compensation and benefits for elected officials must be adequate to attract highly qualified personnel. All laws are applied to elected and appointed government members as I need to take a drink of water, Nathan. Excuse me. Let's take a little. Let's see. Okay, good. Gerrymandering is illegal, and the difference between popular votes and the congressional seats should be minimized. We know how to do this. We're actually very good at it. We know a lot about the characteristics of people that live in any neighborhood in the country. And so we should be drawn by nonpartisan commissions with that in mind, that we should, the seats that are won are related to the number of popular votes. The state and county borders may be changed or consolidated to improve efficiency and compensate for population density differences. It is important to remember that our political borders are created mostly by accident, and we'd be better off to respect our existing subcultures to some extent. We actually have about 12 subcultures, depending on who's doing the study in this country, of major differences in Americans as you move through the country. Create larger legislative districts that have multiple legislative seats. And in a district with 4 representatives, two of the seats would run every 2 years. And this opens it up to more parties and participation. And we'll probably, in many areas of the country, require much bigger legislative districts. Half of the legislative seats, it's very common to do that in city and local governments, actually. And another thing that's you commonly find in small towns is that half the legislative seats should be reserved for female candidates to acquire more equal representation by females. And so you have aldermen and alderwomen in many cities around the country. So we intend to have half and half. And next, the practice of Senate filibusters are ended. And so a lot of times these powerful congressmen give themselves all kinds of little special tricks and treats like that to basically make sure that the minority is winning. So majority rules, unless specifically defined in this Constitution, are only a few places where they wanted more than a majority. Consider the elimination of federal and state senates. And so when we created this Constitution, we basically were emulating England, which had a House of Lords, and they're perfectly good houses to maintain the status quo and suppress change. Bills before Congress should represent one primary purpose. Amendments to bills must be directly related to the primary purpose of the bill. That sounds so basic, but it's so badly abused. I mean, we have these bills that are thousands of pages long. Nobody actually reads them. And nobody knows what's hidden away in it, and all those little amendments and things that they stick in there. So we need to get away from that practice. And the one way to get away from that practice and force the issue is that presidents and state governors should have a line item veto to maintain budget control. And in this case, we've got a perfect example in Missouri now where our governor has used his line item control to remove about $1 billion of the stuff that the state legislator had sent him, so he basically went through it. If they couldn't justify it, there's a line drawn through it, and it doesn't go into effect. So you cut $1 billion that way out of the budget. Next. Political and government officials may be required to retire at the same age as average citizens. And politicians can no longer run for office if the term takes them beyond, say, a mandatory age. And ones that seem to be kicked around a lot are 70, 75, something like that. Older, experienced politicians in good health should serve the people as appointed department heads, and there's all kinds of jobs that wouldn't require as much stress and strain on them, but they could do a very adequate job because they're so experienced. Mandatory term limits should be considered for most of the high-level political and appointed positions to encourage turnover. Now, some people are more in favor of that than others because you will get a less experienced legislator that way, and so you'll be doing a lot of training, and they tend to forget the institutional memory of the place. And we should be mentoring our replacement representatives better than we do. All judges are required to stand for election every 2 years. Nobody gets to serve for life, period. I don't know who came up with that idea, but serving for life, having somebody, we've had them over 100 years old in the Senate. Judges nominated for candidates for positions are presented to the Congress for approval by nonpartisan commission. So it's a complex thing to pick your judges, and we need to rely on the advice of some experts in terms of the judiciary systems in order to pick out those candidates that will be even-handed and fair in their rulings. Wouldn't that be nice? The number of judges may be increased to facilitate a timely process of judicial business, and the pace at which they're moving doesn't appear to be adequate. And so we've actually raised the Supreme Court judge number several times in our history. There's no reason why we can't do that again. Next. And the Electoral College is ended and replaced with a national popular vote. And there's several ways to do that. There's several movements currently underway. One way to do that would be to basically say that instead of a winner-take-all election, where they take all of the delegates from a state that they have to proportion the number of the electoral college members in accordance to the popular vote. So they would be awarded a percentage or a portion of that. A recall election may be held to remove any elected or appointed government official. And so when getting back to the idea that we're not great at hiring and we're terrible at firing anybody in government that seems to be a troublemaker, we really need the ability for the people to say, we've had enough of you, you need to get out of my government. And so we suggest that recall elections ought to be kind of the standardized feature.